Hey guys, Modsy here, back with another video. And today I'd like to welcome you to our new podcast. This is the Pixel Talk podcast, and I've got a really awesome guest with me today. If you are first to watch this video, this is actually side B of a multi-part podcast that we are doing. Side A is, of course, on my guest's channel, and I've got with me today someone that I've been following on YouTube for a little while now, and he also does very similar work to me, and that is Nathan from PIXELPIPES. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Nathan.
Thank you. Yes, I run the channel PIXELPIPES and have been since early 2016. So heading into my first year anniversary. Yeah, we're just all about graphics cards, retro graphics cards, and 3D history and just nostalgia stuff and benchmarking and history and yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah. Nathan is also an avid video card collector like myself. He has quite a few desirable cards in his collection that I wish I could have, or wish I could find for my own collection, I should say. Yeah, we've you and I sort of connected a few weeks ago and sort of hit it off really, really well, and decided that it was you that approached me and suggested you're looking to do a collaboration with someone to do like a podcast format style collaboration, and I absolutely love the idea. It's something that I've been thinking of, like sort of like a wish and a dream in the future that I would love to be able to do with some of these other awesome retro channels. And to be honest, I was kind of a little bit surprised in a good way that I got reached out to before I got to a point where I thought I was actually good enough to, or had a more like a decent enough channel that someone would actually bother reaching out to me, which is really, I kind of am still a bit perplexed by that. But essentially, so
that's putting me a little bit on a pedestal, I think.
I mean, your channel's doing pretty well, and the content that you do is very, very good. It's very high quality stuff for someone that, with the resources very similar to what I have, just starting out in our house, in our office, basically just talking about the things that we love and the video cards and stuff that we've got. Your knowledge is really, really good as well, which is awesome. But essentially, so this podcast that we are doing is all things retro PC gaming and hardware related. We're going to have a bit of a strong focus on video cards, probably because we have a big history with video cards between us, and we could probably talk for hours on end about the different eras in video cards and stuff. And yeah, so if you missed part A or side A, we're not sure exactly what we're going to call it just yet, but side A, where we talked about the downsides to retro collecting and just talking about some of the stigmas and things like the shipping and reasons for collecting and bad practices and things like that. Challenges of obtaining...
My video left it on a down note.
A little bit, but that's okay. It's just one of those things where there's a lot to talk about, and there's definitely a lot of information that people that are starting out collecting, and just even not collecting, if they're wanting to build a retro PC, can get a lot of information about the topics and stuff that we covered in that one. So what I'm going to do here is, in the first episode, we did give a brief introduction to our histories and how we got into PC gaming and collecting and things like that. So we're going to sort of rehash that in case you're watching this video first rather than his, because you can kind of watch them in any order. You don't have to watch one specifically before the other one. You can watch them in either order. So what I'll do is I'll kick off with Nathan, if you want to tell us all about your history in terms of when you got into PC gaming and got into collecting and things like that.
Yeah, pretty much I got into PC gaming since, I was a kid, obviously, playing around with the school computers before I ever had a computer of my own to mess with. But I kind of knew right away that I had kind of an affinity and an attraction towards computers. Even when it was just DOS and I didn't even know how the command line system worked, I would just like to try and see if I could get games to run, having no knowledge of the hardware or the issues of compatibility or anything like that. And, that was sometimes something that was a bit of a challenge to actually be able to do at school without getting yelled at. But basically, when I did finally have, our family did have a computer to mess around with. I was, fortunate enough to have a system with fast enough onboard graphics to be able to play some games at least. And I had Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which my mom randomly purchased for me for my birthday one year. I think she was advised by somebody at Walmart or something.
Most likely.
But, and so, yeah, so that was my first introduction to like a real 3D accelerated kind of a high budget type of game, not just some crappy Flash game online or something like that.
Yeah.
And, the concept of changing resolutions and graphical settings and stuff like that to improve your frame rate, which, wasn't easy to monitor back in those days, so you just kind of had to perceive the smoothness.
Yeah.
I didn't really get into PC gaming until, 2002, at least with the high-end stuff, when I was a teenager. And especially when my friend built his first gaming system, he saved up all summer, and we would talk back and forth about how to, what parts he should get. And I remember when it first started off, it was originally going to have the 9700 Pro, and I think the Pentium 4 B series 3.06 gigahertz processor, which was the first one to have hyperthreading.
Yep.
Actually, on a side note, I'd kind of like to build a retro system just based around that processor, because it's kind of a major historical point in Intel processor history. But and then it evolves into 9800 Pro 256 MB GDDR2 edition, which if you've seen anything on my channel, you may have seen I actually have one of those cards and got it a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Mainly because he had it back then when it was brand new, and I have a lot of memories being over at his house and playing games on it. And so that was really kind of the beginning of really being introduced and learning about hardware. And then from there, it was just a lot of just buying parts and trying to upgrade my own system with very little funds and overclocking and some mishaps and
yep, which we've all had.
Various things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to jump ahead a little bit, with the whole retro collecting thing. Basically, I've had grown to become a huge enthusiast of graphics cards just in general. I mean, they are some of the most advanced technology ever, and they're made for consumers. In fact, there are some really cool, some of the best commercials ever made from 3D effects of the time about how powerful their chips are and how they'll change the world. And then it's like, oh, but let's use them for gaming.
Yeah, exactly.
I just love those commercials. But that is the quintessential truth of what graphics cards, at least what they used to be. They used to be the cutting edge of what computer technology could achieve. And that's what I really loved about them. And I actually wanted to buy...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I almost wanted to... I just wanted to get the high-end version of every generation of graphics cards, just for my own, amusement of just loving the history of it, and I didn't really think of it as even really a collection per se. Just having a, something. I was even thinking of putting them on the wall and just have the different historical points of the graphics card history. And I started that in 2010. I had a 6800 Ultra. And I tried to get a 6800 Ultra 512 MB, but it ended up being the Quadro variant.
Yeah.
And, didn't pick it up again until some years later when I watched a YouTube channel, which many of you may be familiar with, called Phil's Computer Lab, and in which he was talking about the joys of painting and also retro computers.
Yep.
Actually, his channel has nothing to do with painting. I just made that up. No,
but Phil's channel is really awesome. He's got a lot of good stuff on there.
Yeah, it's a really good channel.
Yeah,
and he's talking about specifically Windows XP gaming, which is my era of high end gaming. And I'm like, I have all these old parts. I had a 6800 Ultra that I bought, a long time ago that I never really got working. I could just throw these parts together and that's kind of where it started. It was just really, really fun to just, didn't have to have a lot of money. Just put these, of course, now you have to have a lot of money to build a retro system, but that's another subject. Watch Side A for that talk.
Yeah, in fact, we're actually going to cover it a little bit briefly here as well for the main topic. But I guess
and then like 2015 is where I really started it back up again, and then it kind of evolved into having a channel to talk about them as well. So
yeah. Well, for those of you who have come across from Nathan's channel PIXELPIPES and you're watching my content for the first time over here, well, my name's Aaron, more commonly known as Modsy in the gaming side of things. I've been around for a little bit here in Australia, known by that name around in some areas, I guess you can say. But I've been retro collecting now for a couple of years, started in late 2015. I've been PC gaming ever since the 90s, on my grandfather's old PC, playing games like Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, Network Q Rally, some of those really old games, like on 95 and DOS. Played quite a few of the old, like Duke Nukem 2. Love that old game. Love those old games. Really, really awesome. But yeah, I've been sort of got into PC gaming and building my own PCs around the early 2000s in 2002, very similar to Nathan. And I kind of my first ever PC was actually in 1998, and it was given to me by my auntie, and it was this AMD 486 DX100 system, and it was good enough to play like Quake 2 on, and that was really it. And then in 2002 I got into having my own like proper built modern system, and all the friends that I was hanging around with were into modding their PCs and building them up and buying the latest hardware. And they took one look at the PC that I bought and said, wow, that thing's a piece of shit, you need to do something about it. And decided that I'm going to spend every cent that I earned on upgrading my PC. And here we are 15-odd years later, a bit more than 15 years now, quite a few, bit more than 15, almost 15 years. My math isn't wrong.
We're old now.
Yeah, my math is a bit outdated. It's a bit old, but here we are now, still building modern PCs. But in the last few years, got into more retro PCs and retro video card collecting. So that's kind of like a brief history of me and my background and side of things. So this podcast, Pixel Talk, is going to be about talking all things retro PC related, and each week we're going to be covering different topics. And for this side B topic, we're going to be covering the resurgence of retro PC building. And that's sort of a loose topic in a way, because it's also going to cover a little bit about retro collecting a little bit in a way, just very briefly, or just buying retro gear in general. So we're going to cover, to start with, like why now? Why has this resurgence? I can't even speak English. Why has this resurgence happened now? What are some of the influences in modern hardware and things like that are happening in modern tech society and things like that? What's actually happening now that's causing this resurgence in retro PC building? And
I know, I have
like
an
that.
answer.
So, yeah?
Because if it happened 20 years ago, then it wouldn't be retro. They would be current.
Exactly. Well, I guess if you want to play around with some of the old stuff from like the 70s and 80s, which would have been considered retro, but yeah, I guess.
Oh, God. Yeah. I guess technically that's true.
Small shameless plug, if you are interested in late 70s, early 80s technology, the next video that I'm putting up is on a Russian CPU from the late 70s, early 80s coming soon, but that'll be another week or so away for that. So I guess one of the things that I've noticed definitely, like in what got me into retro building and stuff of the recent years, is just sheer boredom in modern hardware. Like, I've been building and modding PCs, like getting the latest hardware right up until 2012. Pretty much I had the modern hardware. I had 2500K in 2010. I had 2500K, two GTX 760s. It was pretty much modern average. It wasn't the highest of high end, but it was modern for the time. And then ever since then, everything, especially with the Intel CPUs being just such a small increment and just so stagnant, and there being just almost no competition from AMD, the modern PC side of things has just been really boring. I kind of built my system to the point where it has full custom liquid cooling, and just didn't want to touch it. I basically have best in socket RAM. I had a GTX 970 up until recently when I traded it for a Titan. Got a 3770K. There's really nothing I can do unless I do a complete platform change myself, and I'm just bored with it. And it kind of made me realize that I've got some older bits and pieces laying around, and I wanted to go back to a time when things were just a lot more exciting. There was more fun games. There was none of this, microtransaction crap in games. A game was just a game, and it was just a lot more fun. There was a lot less publisher-related influence on publisher. Is that right in saying publisher, or is it? What am I trying to think?
I would say like the marketing and monetization, like and that sort of thing.
Like
it's just the gameplay and a single player, and they didn't need an online component. You just, you could just play the game, and they could have a story. It's almost like, I don't know. There's like an entire genre or type of game that you just don't see anymore these days.
Or if you do see them, that's usually the indie games that are trying to bring back the old games in an indie way. And some of the indie games that have come out in the last couple of years have been so good. And my mind has completely gone blank to the examples that I was going to give.
Well, there's one that I can think of. There's one that was Dusk.
Oh yes, yep. Yep. That's a good one.
And that's a really good one for bringing back kind of the old, sort of the original Quake feeling of gameplay, right down to even the rendering styles. Just really awesome. But more than likely, if you're watching this, you've probably heard of Dusk. But if you haven't, it is on Steam. It is a lot of fun. They actually released episode 2 recently, which actually I haven't played yet. I only played the first episode. But it's really fun. Non-linear levels, so they're more like maze-like and... finding keys and backtracking and going through like secret areas and stuff. So they really have the level design down, down pat for what they're trying to reference back to, the era of gaming that they're trying to recreate.
Yeah. Definitely. Like people just wanting to get back into good classic games again because there's just been so much frustration. Like people of I guess because we're roughly the same age. That grew up on like the Quakes, Dooms, Duke Nukems, these sort of games that are just absolute pure fun, and you can tinker with like the level editors and design and mod and all that kind of stuff. There's just so many games these days that they're just not fun. There's just too much policy, too much. They're built by a team of like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and it's just like. The end product is just not as fun as what these old games were, like Quake 1, Quake 2, that was made like with a team of less than 20
driven,
people. Yeah, exactly. And it's like pumping out that next version, like Call of Duty series. Oh my god, I used to love the Call of Duty series, like 1, 2, not so much 3, but definitely I played a ton of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, like right down to the competitive pro mod side of things. I love that game, and then ever since then it's just been like that. We've got to get the next version out, got to get the next version out, and ever since that happened, Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's like me too, like my memories about like the original like Call of Duty like 2000 from 2003, and then the United Offensive expansion. A friend of mine, and I would play that. That's like one of the games I remember the most playing on his system was, that series. There's something just like really, just I don't know, just that has not been recaptured from that time.
Yeah. I think like after when I got sick of the Call of Duty series, which is actually quite funny because I started out playing Counter-Strike, and if I had to name my favorite FPS, it would go Quake 2, Counter-Strike, as in like 1.6, and then it would be probably Battlefield 2, COD 4, and then probably Battlefield 4 for that. But like I switched over to the Battlefield franchise around Bad Company 2 and fell in love with the Battlefield franchise right up until Battlefield 4, and then I just kind of didn't really like them going back to Battlefield 1. I never bought Battlefield 1, not a fan of it. And then like what they're doing with the whole Battlefront series, Star Wars Battlefront series, it's just such a cash cow of a game that it's just really not even...
Oh, yeah.
It's just incredible. And so I wanted to go...
Even though they've gone back on some of it,
yep.
Like, you know, it's like Destiny 2. Like, look at all the controversy around that game.
Yep.
You know, it's insane. Like, you're just trying to, you know, literally, like, it's not even as though the first game was really that old-fashioned, but then this one, they're just really, like, trying to push the envelope in all the wrong ways in terms of rigging money out of people and things like that. It's just unbelievable. Well,
see, I didn't play Destiny 1, but I have played Destiny 2, and I played... I went into it knowing that it was an MMO that was a very empty MMO in terms of content. But I wanted something different. I wanted a first-person MMO experience, and Destiny definitely gives that for the story side of it. It's got a really cool story. If you're not too heavily... I know some people criticize its story, but it's like... it's not too bad. But I got into it and then realized once I hit endgame that there's just nothing to do, and then I just stopped playing it because it's boring. But like for me, like if I had to separate what I'm doing these days in terms of my free time for gaming, 50% of my time is spent on my retro machine, because I just go back and chuck in like Far Cry 1, and I think I played that game through like 15, 20 times over the last, like, since it came out, because it's one of my all-time favorite games. I'm
actually amazed that I could go back and play it and actually get through that very last section in the volcano map.
Yep.
Because I remember back in the day, like, when I first played that one level, it was one of the most frustrating, like, levels in all of gaming, just for the way they're able to pick you off from a distance.
Yep.
It's actually amazing how I was able to go back and actually play it better than I had years earlier. But, you know, other than those aspects of it, there's something so funny about the kind of the B-movie, campy story, and the overly shiny graphics, because, you know, they just really wanted to show off those DirectX 9 shaders and and everything. Like, that captures that moment in gaming so well.
I was actually doing some recording of Far Cry 1 last week, and it hit me when I was going through the very first stage of the game, as you just exit out of the first, like, the little bunker that you're in, and you're open up to the world for the first time. And it just dawned on me that Far Cry 1 has the storyline of, well, let's see, you're a man in a red shirt trying to rescue your female companion who's been captured by an evil villain, and there's lots of monsters that you kill. And the first reference that I went to was Mario, because it's basically just the plot of Mario with DirectX 9 in 3D environment, which I thought was hilarious. But
if you look at the mutants in Far Cry, they look a lot like the Koopas in the Super Mario movie.
Yep. Yeah, they do, actually. They really do. Yeah. But for me, Far Cry's... I've played the newer versions of Far Cry 2 and Far Cry 3, and I think only Blood Dragon is one that I just absolutely enjoyed. I don't know if you've played Far Cry Blood Dragon, but that game is...
Yeah.
That game is awesome. But like I still kick back and jump in and play Battlefield 2 on my retro machine, because I love just jumping in and just flying around in the helicopter and just enjoying when a game was just a game. You know, there was none of this balancing because one weapon was, you know, more powerful than another weapon. You know, it was just the game was the game. There was a little bit of tweaking in that early era, but it's not like games of a modern era, where like, every 2 months when a Battlefield 4 patch comes out, there's always tweaks to a weapon, and suddenly that one weapon gets nerfed so bad that it's just so crap. It goes from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Well, because it's gotten so complicated. Because it used to just be, this was your weapons.
Yeah.
Now it's like, oh, here's your weapon upgrade loadouts, and here's your perks, and here's your this and that.
Yeah.
It's like keeping it balanced is like 10 times harder now.
Yeah.
Because they're also trying to monetize the hell out of them at the same time and add in all these extra features.
Yeah, yeah.
Which a lot of people love. I mean, people love progression and a sense of gaining something while you're playing. But, of course, nowadays it's really more of a gambling system than anything else.
Yep, yep. So bringing it back around to the hardware side of things, we're at this time where early 2000s hardware is now considered to be retro. Even I would say up to like 2008. That sort of stuff. Like the Windows XP and Windows Vista era hardware is definitely worthy of a retro tag these days. And it like from the sort of very late 90s through to the Vista era, the hardware is just so plug and play that gaming started to become a more common thing, especially among younger people. It was a lot of fun. There was more parts available. There was more companies doing more things in the PC space. You had modding taking off. You had custom designed cases. You had things were starting to become a lot more universal in terms of case designing, all this sort of stuff. And suddenly companies were wanting to push things to the limit as well in terms of better cooling on video cards, extravagant coolers. Water cooling started to come in a lot more heavily and a lot more like off the shelf, rather than people jerry-rigging up an old air conditioning unit out of a car or something, or out of a fridge, or a fish tank, which I had been to a few LAN parties in the early 2000s where people went to a pet store and grabbed pet water tank, like water pumps and things like that. And then grabbed a radiator out of a scrapyard from a car scrapyard and mounted it to the side of their case. And now this
it was the Wild West of the hardware age.
It really was. And there's just so much of that hardware around that you can get, and it's so cheap. Like especially the early 2000s. Like if you're not after the best of the best for each era, you can jump on eBay right now and pick up like an like a AMD Athlon XP CPU, like a 2500, 2600K, something like that, for like less than $10. They're so cheap. But it's things like motherboards and graphics cards specifically that's where you end up paying a premium for some of the more high-end components. But RAM's really cheap, which is in stark contrast to what RAM is like in the modern era, especially right now.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Can't
really say that for video cards, because video cards have really gone through the roof, the modern ones these days. But
yeah, well, yeah. It's like the same. Like even if you look at what's considered expensive in the retro world, it's nowhere near to scale with what is happening with.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Because the retro cards, at the worst, they might get close to, I'm talking like the rarest, the rare cards, they might sort of get close to what they were at MSRP. Yes. So like a GeForce FX 5800 Ultra, you might never see that on eBay, you might never see somebody willing to sell one, but if they do, you're going to probably pay $500 or so for it, which is pretty close to what it went for when it was new. And that's the worst case scenario for the retro world.
Yep.
Not like 2 or 3 times the price of MSRP.
Exactly. So like my collection of video cards behind me here, and I do realize it's out of focus, so I do apologize, guys. So guys, the video card that's there is my Asus V8460 Ultra Deluxe GeForce 4 Ti 4600. That video card, for instance, retailed for, here in Australia, between $850 and $950. That's one of the rarest models of that card that you can get, especially in good condition. And like to buy that now, you're looking between sort of maybe between 150 and 250 US, which is in the ballpark of what I paid for that now. And that's considered expensive because of how old it is. But something like a Voodoo 5 5500, you know, that's something that's going to go for maybe even more than that. But it's still nowhere near what they were brand new.
Yeah.
So this is where it comes into one of the things I wanted to cover, which is like the cost of building versus enjoyment. And that kind of covers, the enjoyment factor kind of covers two sides of it. You can get enjoyment out of collecting, you can get enjoyment out of building a specific, like a retro PC, like your ultimate 2004 retro PC, and use like what to you is the best parts that you might not have been able to afford back in the day. And suddenly you can build a system for like, let's say $200 to $300 now that would have cost you $3,000 10 years ago. Or even 15 years ago, and you can get so much enjoyment out of going back and suddenly playing all the games that you could only run at low detail or medium detail back in the day, and suddenly experience these games all over again at, you know, really high resolutions or better resolutions, maxed out quality. Maybe not Crysis. If you want to go back and run it on old hardware, it's still going to run like crap, but you know, there's some games that you can just go back to and
the master race, like the super elite people had in their rigs and stuff.
Yeah. So like my retro PC is that I built is the ultimate 2004, or what I see is the ultimate 2004 retro PC. 3.4 Pentium 4 Northwood hyperthreading. 6800 Ultra AGP, 2 gig of OCZ, Platinum Edition RAM. The only thing that's modern is there in that system is the power supply and hard drive, because I wanted a hard drive that didn't have issues of hard drives that hard drives had back in the day, and I also didn't want to use an old power supply. So there's a golden tip if you're building a retro PC. I recommend using a modern power supply. Because you can run into a whole lot of trouble if you're trying to buy period accurate hardware in terms of power supplies. But I use that thing not daily, but I use it weekly to the point where it's definitely taking up a majority of my gaming time, just going back and playing these old games. And the cost of building that system versus building a modern or system, like upgrading my main desktop. The value scale there goes through the roof because there's just so many old games that you can play on these that are just so much more fun than modern games. It's just really awesome. So you've got a nice retro PC there. What's the PC that you built?
Let's see. Well, my favorite one is using an Athon 64 X2 4400 plus. I have that clocked at 2.8 gigahertz, and is using an ASRock board, which has both a AGP and PCI Express slot. So obviously, when I'm switching back and forth between different graphics cards, I can use multiple eras of graphics cards in that one system. And the only limitation is that it's a PCI Express 1.1. It doesn't have universal AGP, so I can only use 4X cards or newer. And the CPU is only so fast, so I can't really use like an 8800 GTX in there or newer. But that's like my favorite system for playing like and benchmarking and stuff like that. And it's horribly noisy, which I like because it's back in the day like. You did not have these 120 or 140 millimeter fans that would just have this like complete silent or very gentle whispering sound to them. You had these freaking high RPM 80 millimeter or 90 millimeter fans that just were even noisy smaller. And the sign of a good gamer PC was a PC that had like a billion of these fans. and they're all cranked up and loud. And that was retro. That was gaming in the early 2000s.
Yeah. Yeah, I specifically remember I had when I had my XP 3200 Plus, Athlon XP 3200 Plus, I had a CPU cooler that was by Thermaltake that was called the Thermaltake Volcano Extreme 12 Plus, and it had a like a 40mm thick fan. It was an 80mm fan, but it was 40mm thick, and it had 3 blades on it. And when you cranked that thing up, it was like a jet turbine. Well, for me, when I started to do really crazy overclocking on that, that thing wasn't good enough. And I bought a fan by a company called Vantech. And if you're familiar with Vantech, or a company called Delta, they also made very similar fans. But the one that I bought was called a Vantech Tornado.
Oh, yes.
And those things, an 80mm Vantech Tornado as a CPU, like on a CPU as a CPU cooler fan, crank that thing to maximum, and you'll run your CPU at ambient temperature because of the amount of airflow that thing pushes through. But that thing really it's louder than your average vacuum cleaner. Like imagine just having a vacuum cleaner permanently on, like a really, really loud vacuum cleaner, not one of those Dysons that are, nice and quiet. I'm talking about an old, really, an old vacuum cleaner. That it was really, really loud. It was obnoxiously loud. In fact, I did a video on it I just forgot about that. I actually did a video really recently called The Most Obnoxious PC You Could Take to a LAN Party. It was like a Halloween, just a fun video I did for Halloween, and I chucked in like all the loudest hardware I could and put it in this case, and I just turned all the fans up to maximum, and well, that thing's really loud. It's crazy.
Well, that's extreme overclocking,
Yeah.
That was that era.
Yeah.
But so why is this happening now, though? Like, we're into it because we grew up with this stuff, but we aren't necessarily the type of people that are buying all this stuff. So why is this happening now? Like this huge buildup. Well, I guess we have to justify that it is happening because we've seen the prices going up and up on this old hardware. We're seeing YouTube channels popping up all the time. These annoying YouTubers who think they can just start a channel and I don't know what they're thinking, talking about retro hardware. By the way, go check out PIXELPIPES. So it's linked down in the description. It's building up though, and But why is it happening now? Like all of a sudden?
It really, there's probably multiple reasons that you can pin it down. It can be for multiple reasons. Everyone will, there's certain people are going to have their own reasons for wanting to go back, whether it be for the games, whether it be frustration with modern hardware, or in my case, just bored with modern hardware and having that itch to tinker and play with hardware that just isn't being satisfied with modern hardware at all. And then there's just a fascination of what came before. You have people that never used hardware of that era, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Someone who's never had a 3DFX card and what it was like to actually run a Voodoo card in a system where you had to have like a 2D card matched with a 3D card, and then the bridging cables, and it's an era of gaming that people missed out on, so they almost want to go back and experience. They've got enough knowledge of building their modern systems. They're wanting to get back and experience some older games, the games that might not run on modern systems, and they've got that itch as well to build something old, and they're just hitting up eBay and buying some old parts and stuff.
It's just like learning about the past. It's guys like us that did grow up with this stuff and did remember it, making videos about it, and all the YouTube channels that are way older than ours, like Lazy Game Reviews and stuff like that are kind of encouraging this new generation of kids that are born in the 90s who didn't get to, who are still too young to have experienced PC gaming even in the early 2000s. or maybe were born in
Yeah.
2000, who are suddenly interested in this stuff because we're talking about it and we're like, oh, look how exciting it was, and I guess they're recognizing that.
Yeah, yeah. Another really cool thing I like about it as well is the community around it as well. Like, there's people that they might not be actually buying hardware even initially straight away. They might be watching one of their favorite tech YouTubers who might have started themselves, who might be people like us who grew up with this hardware and were using it back in the day. Jay, sorry, not Jay, I was going to mention, sorry, like Linus from Linus Tech Tips. He's one of the biggest tech YouTubers in the world right now. And, they've started to do retro videos, looking back at some old videos, old hardware, like their Sleeper PC series that they do, where they've done like Voodoo and things like that. And it's people that are watching these guys on YouTube that never dealt with this old hardware are suddenly seeing how fun it was, how cool it is, and they're starting to get into it.
And it must seem so odd too,
which is
just
really cool.
How different the hardware was and how it behaved. Like the reason he's doing it is because it's popular. It's more of a reaction than it is a, trying to blaze a new trail. I think, anyway.
In a way, yeah.
But, they're
I
talking about
know
hardware that, to run 2 graphics cards and the old-fashioned SLI, there's all this setup involved to get it to work. It's kind of crazy because, like you said, Windows XP was so plug-and-play. And, in fact, it holds up. You can go back and still use Windows XP. And other than the not having the ability to search in the start menu, you're really not missing much. So, and it's just really simple. Whereas I have a hard time going back to Windows 98, which is funny because I actually did grow up on Windows 98 and 95 before that, and even used some Windows 3.1 and stuff. But Windows XP is the only one that I can actually go back to and really tolerate and enjoy using.
See, I'm like, I can go back and use XP. I was actually one of the people that kept using XP right through the Vista era. I jumped on Vista while it was still in beta, and I actually had access to the press release versions for like review samples for reviewing. And I hated it. Like, it looked really good. I liked the direction that they were going with it. It looked modern. It looked good at the time. But man, was it a piece of crap to use. Like you might think it's like a beta version of a game these days. It's expected to have bugs. It's expected to not have hardware compatibility because there's not relevant drivers and things like that. But my God, that operating system was just trash. And I'm wanting to go back and build a Windows Vista machine to sort of go back to it now and just experience what it's like. But I'm also wanting to go back and build a Windows 98 PC, and in fact, I've actually got half the parts already to go back and build a Pentium 3 based, Windows 98 based machine, because even my Windows XP machine is still too modern for some of the games that I want to actually go back and play. And I want to go back and play some games on Windows 98 and DOS that's running on a bit slower hardware.
I think the Windows Vista idea is a really cool one, just because now that really is retro now. That was 2007,
Yep.
And yeah, like you said, when that first came out, it was like the worst possible growing pains. They had completely screwed over the audio card market. So you had like no hardware acceleration.
I was about to say, I'd forgotten about the sound card thing, because I remember that, Sound Blaster had all these really awesome cards for like Windows XP era, and suddenly Vista rolls around and suddenly it was like obsolete to have a sound card because there was just no support anymore.
And they tried to patch it over with like the Open AL Alchemy app.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep.
Which kind of worked some of the time, but it was literally them just trying to prop up their business again with all of the hardware accelerated features that they had. I still don't know why Vista did it, why Microsoft did it at that time. Maybe something to do with some perceived stability issues or something that were linked to the sound card. I don't know. But it's, we kind of, like, gamers kind of suffer for it the most, which is why it's kind of the whole reason you build a Windows XP system, right? Which kind of links into why you would even want to build it, because you do get the audio as one of the biggest benefactors of an XP environment. And that was like the pinnacle of it. Like that was right at the tail end of XP is when you started getting the X-Fi cards and like the really high quality EAX and headphone surround and stuff like that.
It was the era when, I mean, I know that a lot of people, like a sound card was a really big deal in the early, like DOS, like late 90s, even mid 90s even, for gaming. Like a sound card was almost more important than a video card, because the sound, like the difference between your old, a PC speaker audio, like the beeps and boops from a PC speaker compared to, the early Sound Blaster cards was like, it's the difference between like a GTX 1080 Ti now and, I was going to say an ATI card, but that's probably a bit harsh against ATI. But it's like it's two sides of a coin. It's two ends of a football field.
It's like not being able to hear and then suddenly having the ability to hear, because it really was that it was total difference.
It really was.
It's
and the gaming experience from like the early DOS games and stuff. Having a sound card was just night and day. Like the game was just so much better as soon as you had a sound card in.
And then you start getting into 3D. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think you were about to take the words right out of my mouth, so you may as well go ahead.
I was just gonna say because then you get into hardware acceleration starting in like '98 and stuff like that with like the Vortex series cards and stuff like that. And it actually made a difference to the speed of your games, even all up until Windows XP. I remember the Tech Report did a really interesting article on whether or not like having an Audigy card affects your frame rate, and it actually did, especially when you're talking about a time when there's just single core processors or like single threaded gaming. Having a fast audio card meant that your CPU was not wasting cycles trying to process your audio as much. Which is why in all my retro systems, besides, just the quality and the enjoyment aspect of it, I want to have a fast sound card so I could take the burden off of the CPU when I'm testing. But
it was a time when plugging a sound card in actually influenced benchmarks, like gaming benchmarks.
Yeah.
Because CPUs were such a bottleneck, like especially the Athlon XP era. Even though they were really good CPUs, like going from onboard, was it AC whatever it is? I can't remember what it is. The old chipset.
AC 97.
90. That's the one. I was going to say 95, but yeah, AC 97. Like the old chipsets back then, those things would use 30 to 50% CPU utilization in games that had a lot of audio and a lot of stuff going on, and that's really taxing on a game. Suddenly you chuck in a sound card and your CPU is just completely freed up to now, run the AI in your game and things like that, and it made a genuine, noticeable difference in frame rate. So did just adding a network card in, so that your onboard network traffic and things like that weren't also going through and handled by the CPU as well. Because some onboard network solutions are really CPU bound as well.
But going back into like Vista, there was that whole negative press and stuff about that aspect of losing all of that audio, technology. And then there was the growing pains of like the drivers not being mature and everything crashing all the time and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
But I will tell you, I was one of the people that I was very, very late in upgrading my OSs. So, right before Windows 7 came out, I would finally leave Windows XP. But I started using Windows Vista. And actually the mature version of Windows Vista, when I finally got through all the growing pains and the drivers had gotten stable and all of the patches and everything for security and performance had come out, was actually a competent OS. It just had a really bad name from its early days. It basically took all the flack. it took all the flack
fixed,
from
it was
like
irrelevant.
Windows 7 and stuff like that. That would like if Windows 7, as much loved as Windows 7 is, if that had been the first to come out after Windows XP, guess what? It would have had all the same growing pains.
Yep.
So it would be a really interesting
kinda
idea to go back and build a system around Vista to see what can it really do, and it actually opens you up to more modern games, but with older hardware, because there's still that transition period with the drivers.
Well, Windows Vista as well is that era when PhysX first came in, and if you happen to be one of those collectors or owners of a PhysX card, chuck in an early, what am I thinking, like 8800 GTX or a Radeon HD 2900 or 3870, chuck in a PhysX card and you can play games that take advantage of the PhysX cards, like the first Batman, I think it's like Arkham Asylum.
Yeah.
I think one of the first games that I've played with that takes advantage of a PhysX card. And it makes a genuine difference. And Windows Vista is that era of that early adoption to PhysX before NVIDIA snapped them up. But yeah, so look, we're getting relatively almost close-ish to the end of part 2. But I guess one of the final things we're going to talk about and just cover here is one of the biggest things that I see very commonly in forums, Facebook groups of like retro Facebook groups, is everyone saying like, hey, I'm wanting to build this system, or hey, I've just bought these parts to build a system. And there's always that one guy in the comments that says, I don't know why you bother buying hardware, it's so bad, why don't you just run an emulator? And
it's me. I'm that
it's
guy.
one of those things. It's one of those things that's just like it's like waving a red flag in front of a bull to me, because there's so many reasons why it's so much better to run, games or things like that on period-specific hardware, because there's people have their reasons, whether it's just an emulation just doesn't do a good enough job to bring back the nostalgic feeling or the actual experience of playing games from that particular era that they're trying to play, whether it be console games, like older console games that you're trying to play on PC.
So why don't we do this? Why don't I be the devil's advocate, and I'm going to present to you all these arguments. I'm going to be that guy that made that comment.
Okay.
And then,
sure.
So why would I build a PC, let's say DOS for instance, when there's been so many improvements to DOSBox, being able to even do like 3D accelerated like early games and stuff like that, or even like using like MoSlow to like slow down a CPU or something like that, or even a virtual machine to run these older OSs and play these games, and just use my existing computer hardware rather than build an all new system.
It's one of those things where there's going to be brackets of people. You're going to have those people that are interested in just playing the game, and for them, if they don't have the finances or the resources or the space even to build a retro PC and run a second PC, an emulator is very much the perfect solution for them, especially if they're just wanting to go back and play one or two games, and they're not wanting to have this full category or library of games that they want to go back and play. An emulator is perfect. If they want to just go back and have a bash at playing Duke Nukem 2, DOSBox is perfect for that. But there are some arguments for why running a specific game on its period-accurate hardware is just a totally different experience than running it on an emulator on a modern system. To some people, to a lot of people in fact, it's just that feeling of knowing that this game is running on hardware from that time. It's like the perfect mix and combination of hardware and software to just give that experience that's a pure retro experience, which you just can't get from just loading up an emulator with a ROM and playing it on your modern system. Yes, you're going to still play that game, but it's going to run at the best frame rate. It's going to run perfectly, given you've set up the emulator correctly, and it's going to run perfectly. But going back and playing a DOS game on a system that can barely run a DOS game, and you're playing a platform that's lagging just that little bit where you don't make that jump over the platform, 5 times, and you end up just turning the machine off because you get too frustrated. That sort of an experience you just can't get with an emulator.
But it's kind of holding up to like that retro. I mean, it's keeping that history alive at the same time.
Yeah.
And you think about
it is, yeah.
You think about like you're just talking about like the ad lib sound from like the original Sound Blaster, Pro and stuff like that.
Yep.
They get really good with the emulation, but it's not gonna sound like it did on a real card. Having an OPL3 actual sound card with like a separate like a Yamaha chip on it. It's got such a warm, strong like tone to it.
I think of it this way. I have a playlist on YouTube of game soundtracks, and there's just that one thing. It's that nostalgic feeling that you get when you just hear that one soundtrack that you just absolutely loved in a game. And for me, it was like the Duke Nukem 3D sounds and music and things like that for that game, because there were so many different versions of Duke Nukem 3D that exist today. There's so many different versions of it. And when you go back and when you first experience that game, for example, on period hardware, it had a very distinctive sound. And recreating that exact sound to get that nostalgic buzz out of your retro experience is really hard to do on an emulator, unless you happen to get all the clouds and all the stars aligned to the point where that experience is perfect from what you remember it. I've played, I think I own maybe 10 different copies of Duke Nukem 3D over the years, and I've played them. I played it on an original 486 machine with a Creative Sound Blaster 16 ISA card, and I have never ever been able to recreate the sound of the game that was on that machine ever since. It just, that hardware with that mix of components just gives this really awesome, this sound that you can't replicate
that
even
authenticity.
In an emulator. That's the word I was trying to think of. Yeah, the authenticity of the just having it all lined up. But then the other thing as well is the joysticks. Like, who would have thought back in the day when I was playing Duke Nukem 3D on my grandfather's PC, I was playing Duke Nukem 3D with a joystick, a 2-button joystick. And yes, you can connect a gamepad and remap an Xbox 360 controller to work with an emulator these days, but you can't plug in a serial port 2-button joystick anymore to a PC. You probably can if you wanted to get, like, there's probably some funky USB to serial port adapter with some software that you can probably do it, but it's not as off the shelf as what it is buying period hardware and just plugging it in.
It's always like a hack to try to get it to work on like modern hardware.
Yeah,
you're always, and there isn't always like an out of the box experience, like just plug it in and play with DOSBox. Sometimes you have to really get in there and tweak the CPU speed and the various settings to get it to run right. And with virtual machines too, they have like hardware acceleration, but a lot of things like anti-aliasing and stuff don't work, and things like that. So, and I'm not sure, maybe the audio acceleration stuff that we talked about too may not work on a virtual machine, but I'm not like extensively knowledgeable. But it's there's drawbacks to everything that when these games were made. They were made with this hardware in mind. So if you get the right hardware to match the game, it just works, and it sounds, and it plays, and it looks exactly the way the developers intended, without, a lot of fuss. Okay.
Oh, I need the document up. Where are you? Come back. There we go. And so the experience of running, these older games on an emulator, sometimes you don't have the option of, buying the old hardware. And the resurgence in, retro PC building itself it really comes with what you want to get out of it. Whether you're looking to, build a retro system because you want the experience of playing with the hardware, running the games on period accurate hardware, whether you're a content creator like we are, and you want to talk about your experience with that hardware itself, and it's just really what you get out of it. Whether you're a collector, whether you're a builder, it just seems to be a really popular time, for retro PCs, retro hardware, retro games. It's just a really big thing right now.
Especially when modern hardware is so expensive.
Yep.
And not so easy to actually purchase stuff.
Yeah. I was really excited to have Ryzen, like AMD, come back with Ryzen, and I was really looking forward to finally getting off of the socket 1155 platform and finally upgrade to something a little bit newer. But when I got around to looking at pricing for things, like here in Australia, it's even worse than what it is in America, because we have, not only do you have the conversion of just the native price, but we also have markup on top of that because the conversion's not quite accurate. So what might be $2.99 in America isn't going to be the exact amount, converted into Australian dollars. Here in Australia, we'll bump that up to $5.99 or $4.99. to fit in with that whole 99, thing, which means we can end up paying more for something than what it really should be, which really, really sucks. Like RAM right now, I paid my 16 gig RAM kit that I bought in 2012. If you buy that kit now, it's over double the price, which is just ridiculous. So given that I've got a system in the state that it is, I'm having more fun playing with my retro system and looking at old retro hardware, because it's just, I'm getting more enjoyment out of buying that for cheaper than what I would be buying new modern hardware. And there's no games out either. Like, there's no games that I can't run on my system with the specs that I've got in my current system. There's nothing out that I can't enjoy that's a modern game either. And yeah, it's as simple as that. So that's really sort of my closing thoughts on the resurgence of retro PC building. Do you have any final things you wanted to mention about it at all for the moment?
It's there's a lot of downsides to it. We do it because we are enthusiasts. The same reason that somebody might collect baseball cards and is not satisfied with just downloading JPEG scans of them.
Yeah.
Yep. What's the point of having this little digital version? If you are a collector and you are an enthusiast, and especially not just of the hardware and technology, but of the history as well, and the games, as we said, that run the best and look the best, and sound the best, and play the best on these old systems that they were designed for. And there's it is getting more expensive for some of this stuff. But, so is modern hardware. If you have the space for it, and not a lot of people do, like for DOS gaming, I actually opted to get a DOS-compatible laptop. Because, that's an easy thing to just kind of store out of the way when I'm not using it. I can pull it out, even hook it up to an external monitor when I am. But, it's just things like that. There's... you have to love it. There's no two ways about it. If you don't love it, then go to GOG.com and buy these games pre-configured, because then it will be a painless experience on a modern system, but you may not have all the features or the quality that it would have if it were on native
exactly.
hardware.
All right. So thank you everyone for listening who's made it through this far. I know it's been a very, very long podcast. We are still in definitely experimental mode for this podcast. We are basically, if you could see behind the scenes right now and see how we're filming this, it's definitely a very sketchy duct tape and glue sort of way we've got this at the moment, and it's definitely even more difficult because we're on opposite sides of the world and we're having to share footage backwards and forwards to do this. So there might be a slight delay between when we're actually filming this and when it actually gets released simultaneously on our YouTube channels. So if there is in the future ever a topic that might be relevant, we might be maybe a week or so outdated by the time we actually get the podcast up, but that's okay. So we're going to be trying to do these. We haven't quite nailed down exactly how regular we're going to do them. We're looking at the moment maybe once a month, depending on how long we want to go for, because of just how much we can talk about a particular subject. We don't really want to gloss over, have a podcast that like just glosses over things. We kind of like the idea of going into depth and detail about the topics that we want to cover, because we have so much information that we want to cover. So we kind of figured that with our timelines and with our lives, how busy our lives are individually as well, and the fact that we have our own individual YouTube channels that we are trying to run and still do content for as a priority even. So we're going to try and fit this into sort of like a once a month thing, but we're going to try and make it as worthwhile as possible by covering, definitely the more popular things that people want to talk about and that's interesting, like video cards and collecting and things like that. So so I'm not sure. Normally what we might do is in future episodes we might give a hint to what we might want to talk about in the next episode, whenever that might be in the future. But at this stage, because of how experimental this is at the moment, we've been so focused on doing this one that we haven't actually thought of what we're going to do in the next one just yet. But I would say if you're following us on our social medias, we're probably going to drop hints in the future whenever we are getting close to the time to do the next one about what we're going to be covering, to sort of get you excited about listening into that. So I've been Aaron from Modsy's Retro Collection, and
I've been Nathan from PIXELPIPES.
So thank you very much for watching the podcast, guys, or listening in if you've just sort of chucked this on into the background. And thanks very much, and catch you in the next one.